This is my true story. I gave my best years to one woman. I built a home, paid the bills, and stayed loyal while she smiled at me across the table. I thought we were a team. But one day, I learned she had been living a double life. She was cheating on me with a rich man behind my back, using my name to cover her tracks. That discovery froze my heart, but sharpened my mind. I gathered proof, took it to court, and did something that shocked everyone. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me, if you uncovered betrayal this deep, would you stay silent or would you fight back? Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I chose. I thought I had built a steady life. It was not rich, it was not flashy, but it was ours. Every morning I woke early and walked the same road to work. My shoes wore thin, but I cleaned them until they looked new. My hands cracked from long days of labor, but I hid the pain with silence. I brought home paychecks that were never large, yet I stretched them until they covered everything we needed. The mortgage was paid. The lights stayed on. Food was always on the table, even if it was plain bread and beans more nights than not. I believed this was comfort. I believed this was love. I thought she saw it too. For years, I watched her smile at me across the dinner table. She would place her hands around the bowl of soup I brought home, and she would nod like she was thankful. I thought that nod meant respect. I thought the quiet moments we shared were proof that what I was giving was enough. I worked so she could live without fear. I worked so she would never wonder where the rent would come from. I told myself that my hard work bought her peace of mind. That belief carried me through the winters when the furnace rattled and the summers when sweat poured down my back. But slowly, almost too quietly for me to notice at first, things began to change. It started with her eyes. Eyes that once looked at me with warmth now drifted past me when we sat together. At first I thought she was tired. At first I told myself it was stress. But then I noticed where her eyes landed. Not on me. Not on the small home I had built with every coin I earned. Her eyes followed the neighbors with shiny cars. Her eyes lingered on men who walked into restaurants in polished suits. Her eyes searched for something richer, something grander, something I could not give her. I told myself, lies to survive. I said, she is only curious. I said, every woman dreams sometimes. I said, she will see that what I give her is real. I wanted to believe she would come back to me. But each passing week, her laughter changed. It no longer rang out at the jokes I made when we sat in the kitchen. Instead, she laughed at the stories she told of the people she met at gatherings I could not attend. She spoke of rooms I could not enter, rooms with polished floors, chandeliers, and champagne glasses clinking in the air. She brought home tales of rich men, men who never dirtied their hands, men who never bent their backs in labor, men who carried wealth like a crown. I began to notice the difference in how she looked at me and how she spoke of them. To her, they were bright, shining, powerful. To me, she offered sighs, complaints, and silence. I was the man who paid the bills. They were the men who excited her imagination. And though she never said it out loud at first, I began to feel it in every glance, every pause, every cold smile. One evening, I came home with groceries in my arms. Bread, milk, potatoes. The simple food I had always carried through that door. I found her dressed in clothes I did not remember buying. Her perfume was new, strong, and heavy in the air. She looked at me with impatience, as if my arms full of food were not enough. She did not smile. She only asked why I was late. In that moment, I felt the truth pressing against my chest. I was no longer her source of joy. I was her excuse. I was her background. I was the simple man in the small house while her heart wandered into richer rooms. I told myself I could still save us. I worked harder. I took extra shifts. I put aside even more money, thinking that if I showed her I could provide more, she would see my worth again. I denied myself new clothes, denied myself rest, denied myself every small pleasure, just to make her life softer. But her eyes never returned to me. She came home later and later. She left the table without finishing her food. She stopped asking me how my day had been. She began to complain about the very things she once praised. This house is too small. These meals are too plain. Your work keeps you smelling of sweat. Each word was a small cut, and I carried those cuts on my back like stones. Still, I stayed silent. I told myself, this is marriage. This is sacrifice. I thought if I kept giving, she would remember the love we once had. But the truth was clear. She no longer wanted the life I had built with my hands. She wanted the glitter of another life, a life I could not reach, a life that belonged to men who had never known the weight of poverty. She wanted silk, not cotton. She wanted gold, not steel. She wanted rooms full of mirrors and lights, not a kitchen that smelled of bread and soap. The most painful part was not that she wanted more. The most painful part was that she pretended. She let me believe my steady work still mattered. She let me think the simple life I built still carried meaning. She kissed me on the cheek, but her heart was already walking in another man's house. She smiled at me across the table, but her mind was already lost in a world of wealth. She gave me comfort with her hands, while hiding lies behind her eyes. That was the comfortable lie. The life that seemed whole, but was already broken. The home that looked steady, but had cracks in every corner. The love that seemed real, but was already dead. I lived in that lie for too long, because I wanted to believe in the woman I once knew. I wanted to believe my hard work was enough. But her silence, her stares, her sighs, they told me the truth I did not want to face. She was not mine anymore. She belonged to a hunger that I could never feed. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I loved her. I stayed because I was blind. I stayed because I thought loyalty would be stronger than greed. I stayed in the comfortable lie until the day the evidence landed in my hands and forced me to see what had been in front of me all along. The truth did not come to me in a dramatic way. It did not arrive with shouting or a letter marked with warning or a stranger at my door. Number. It came quietly, the way betrayal often does. It started with something small, something almost invisible. A piece of paper left on the kitchen counter. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary receipt, the kind I had brought home countless times from the store. But when I picked it up, my hands froze. It was not for bread or milk or the small things I used to buy. It was for a dinner. A dinner at a restaurant I could never afford. A place where the cheapest meal cost more than I made in a week. The name on the bill was not mine, and the date was one when she had told me she was working late. I stared at that slip of paper for a long time. My mind wanted to push it away, to pretend it was nothing. But the ink spoke louder than excuses. My heart pounded as I placed it back on the counter, careful not to move it out of place. I sat at the table and waited for her to return home. She walked in hours later, smiling faintly, pretending to be tired. She kissed my cheek and said, "Work was exhausting." I looked at her eyes and said nothing. Inside, though, I knew the receipt had told me the truth. Days later, another sign appeared. She left her phone on the table when she stepped out to take laundry from the line. I had never been the kind of man to pry. I believed trust was sacred, but the slip of paper had changed me. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I told myself I would only look for one thing, only one clue, and if I saw nothing, I would put it back and never speak of it again. But the first message I opened shattered me. It was from him, a man whose name I recognized but never truly knew. He was rich. Everyone in town knew it. He had businesses, cars, and a laugh that filled every room. The message was simple, casual even, but full of meaning. Last night was perfect. Same place next week? Attached was a photo of them together. Her smile was wider than I had seen in years, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. My chest tightened. My breath left me. I set the phone back down before she returned, but the image stayed burned into my mind. I walked outside into the night air, my legs unsteady. The stars above blurred through the tears in my eyes. I thought of all the nights I had waited for her to come home, sitting by the window like a loyal dog. I thought of the meals I reheated, the excuses I believed, the soft kisses she gave me before turning away. It all clicked together now, piece by piece, forming a picture I could no longer deny. I did not confront her right away. Number. Anger is loud, but wisdom is quiet. I needed to be sure. I needed more than a message, more than a receipt. I needed a truth so heavy it could not be denied. And so I became something I never thought I would be: a collector of secrets. I began watching more closely. When she said she was going to the store, I noted the time. When she said she was visiting a friend, I wrote down the address she gave. I noticed her clothes changing, perfumes stronger, shoes I had never seen before. Each detail was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought we shared. I said nothing, but my silence was not weakness. My silence was planning. At work, I asked small questions, casual ones, to people who moved in circles I did not. "Have you been to that new restaurant?" I would ask, or, "Do you know who eats there often?" They laughed, they gossiped, they told me stories without knowing what I was searching for. And in their words, I found confirmation. They spoke of seeing her, sitting with him, their heads close together, their laughter filling the room. Each clue I gathered, I kept hidden. I folded receipts into an old notebook. I printed bank statements when she thought I was asleep. I bought a small recorder and kept it in my pocket when I suspected she would be on the phone. Her whispers, her giggles, her lies. I caught them all, each one carved into memory and tape. It was painful work. Every discovery cut me deeper. Every receipt, every message, every overheard word. It was like another stone tied to my chest. But I did not turn away. I forced myself to look. I forced myself to collect. Because if I did not face it, she would keep living her lie, and I would keep living in shadows. The hardest moment came one evening when she told me she was traveling for a business workshop. I knew better. I followed her from a distance, careful, slow. My heart raced like I was a boy again, but this was no game. I watched her meet him in the parking lot of a hotel, watched them laugh as they walked in together. My knees weakened, but I stood tall. I did not shout, I did not run. I simply wrote down the name of the hotel, the time, the date. Another piece for the file. That night, I could not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me. I knew now there was no mistake, no doubt, no second chance. She had chosen another life, and I had chosen to expose it. That was the quiet discovery. Not a sudden storm, not a dramatic scene, but a slow, crushing rain of truth. One receipt, one message, one photo at a time. I collected it all. I became a man with evidence instead of anger. And in that silence, I prepared for the day I would let the world see what she had hidden. The affair itself was poison enough. To see her smile in another man's arms, to watch her lie with practiced ease, was already more pain than I thought one heart could carry. But betrayal, I learned, rarely walks alone. It brings with it shadows, deeper and darker, that only reveal themselves when you dare to look closer. At first, I thought it was only about her stepping out, her hunger for money, her need for a rich man's hand. But as I gathered more evidence, I began to see that this was not just about infidelity. This was about a double life, a darker thing hiding behind the curtain of her smile. It began with the bank papers. I had gone to the branch to quietly request copies of statements under our shared name. The teller looked nervous as he slid them across the desk, perhaps because he saw the tremor in my hand. I took them home, sat in silence, and studied every line. That is when I noticed transfers to an account I did not recognize. Large sums. Regular sums. Not the kind of spending you hide in grocery bills or small purchases. This was calculated, deliberate, secret. Money leaving our life and entering another life I had never been allowed to see. Each transfer was marked with dates that matched the nights she claimed to be working late or visiting friends. The amounts grew larger with time, as if her confidence in my blindness grew too. It was not just dinners or gifts. It was support. It was funding. She was not just cheating with a man. She was building a second home with him, a second world where I had no place. The receipts grew stranger. Hotel stays under false names. Payments for trips I never knew about. A necklace bought from a jeweler 2 towns away, hidden from me until I found the record in the bank file. She was not only unfaithful. She was living as two people, the dutiful wife in my house and the secret lover in his. But the darkest part was yet to come. I discovered it by accident. One evening, I walked past her desk while she was in the kitchen. Her laptop was open, the screen still glowing. I should have walked away. I should have left it alone. But by then, my heart was already frozen, my trust already broken. My hand moved without thinking, and I saw the emails she thought were hidden. They were not just notes of love or lust. They were arrangements. She was helping him with his own secrets, shady deals, contracts signed in ways that smelled of corruption. She sent him information she had no right to send, whispered things she had overheard from my boss when we still lived under the shadow of his company. She was not only betraying me, she was betraying everyone. Selling loyalty for comfort, trading respect for diamonds. That was the darker thing. It was not just adultery. It was deceit at every level. She was not only a wife who had strayed, she was a conspirator, a partner in something rotten. And every lie she told me was not only to hide her affair, but to protect a bigger truth, that she had chosen a life of dishonor. I sat in the dark that night, the laptop closed on the table, my hands pressed to my face. For 30 years, I had believed in her. For 30 years, I had thought my labor bought her safety and peace. For 30 years, I believed that love could not be broken. And yet here I was, staring into the hollow of her absence, realizing that everything I thought was solid was dust. The discovery changed me. It was no longer about a broken heart. It was no longer about a man who lost his wife to a richer man. It was about justice. She had played with fire, and she thought no one would ever see the smoke. But I had seen it. I had gathered it, and I would not let it vanish. I began to document the darker things with the same care I had given the first. Not only receipts and messages, but records of bank transfers, screenshots of emails, notes of phone calls I overheard. I built a file so thick it could not be ignored. I told myself, one day this will not only be my revenge, it will be her undoing. Every night I lay in bed beside her, pretending to sleep, I felt the weight of that file in my mind. She breathed evenly, dreaming of her other world, while I stayed awake, planning. My heart no longer hurt. It was cold, steady, focused. The man she thought was weak, the man she thought she could mock, was gone. In his place was someone else, someone who would not shout, would not fight, would not beg. Someone who would expose the truth in the one place she could not control, the court. And that was the darkest thing of all. Not just her betrayal, not just her double life, but the realization that the woman I loved never truly existed. She was a mask, a shadow, a performance. And when the mask finally fell, all that remained was a stranger. A stranger who thought she could bury me in lies. But instead, she buried herself. When you are betrayed, anger makes you want to scream. It makes you want to throw things, break plates, slam doors, shout questions that will never be answered honestly. But I did none of that. My anger turned cold. I knew shouting would give her power. I knew rage would make me look weak. So instead, I became quiet. And in my quiet, I became something else. I became a collector of paper. It started small. I took the receipt she left on the counter and placed it inside an old notebook I kept in the drawer. That notebook once held grocery lists and reminders of doctor appointments. Now, it became a vault. Every scrap of proof went into it. The receipt from the restaurant, the hotel bill I found tucked in her purse, the copy of the bank statement I requested at the branch. Each page slid in carefully, hidden behind blank covers, hidden where only I would ever think to look. But I knew paper alone was not enough. People lie. People deny. A receipt could be called a mistake. A message could be called fake. So I began to collect more. I bought a small voice recorder, the kind you can fit in your pocket and no one notices. When she whispered on the phone late at night, I pressed record. Her words, soft and giggling, were captured in full. When she told her friend lies about where she had been, I pressed record again. Her voice betrayed her more than her eyes ever could. I also learned the value of screenshots. On nights when she left her phone carelessly on the counter, I would glance quickly, open the messages, and snap photos with my own old phone. The names, the times, the pictures she thought were private, all captured, stored, hidden away. She deleted them later, but I already had them saved. She thought secrets could vanish with the tap of a finger. She forgot that paper remembers. Screens remember. Files remember. Over time, my notebook was not enough. I bought folders, thick and heavy, and filled them with printouts. Emails she sent to him. Bank transfers she thought I would never see. Flight confirmations for trips she said were workshops. I printed everything. I signed nothing. I stamped dates in the corner so no one could ever say it was made up. I became meticulous, careful, precise. Each file grew like a stone wall around me, protecting me from her lies, preparing me for the day when the truth would matter more than her excuses. Sometimes I sat at the kitchen table at night with the folder open in front of me. She would be upstairs, laughing on the phone, thinking I could not hear. And I would sit there, sliding each paper into place, one after another, like building blocks. With each page, my anger quieted, but my resolve hardened. I told myself, this is no longer about heartbreak. This is about justice. I began to track her movements. I wrote down the times she left the house, the places she claimed to go. I checked credit card statements to match them. If she said she went to a friend's, but the bill showed a charge at a hotel, I wrote it down. If she said she worked late, but the bank showed a payment at a jewelry store, I added it to the list. Every lie met a record. Every denial met proof. It was not easy. There were nights I sat in the dark with tears streaming down my face as I pressed print on another page of proof. There were mornings when my hands shook so badly I could barely hole punch the paper to put it in the binder. Collecting proof of betrayal is not triumph. It is pain turned into order. It is suffering turned into evidence. But I did it anyway, because the alternative was to let her win, to let her bury me in silence. I even went to the extent of hiring a clerk at the courthouse to help me pull public records. I told him I was checking for fraud, and in a way I was. There, too, I found pieces. Documents with her name signed next to his on contracts that were not meant to be seen. She was deeper into his life than I had feared, but every page I added made my case stronger. Soon the folder became heavy. When I lifted it, I felt the weight of betrayal in my arms, but I also felt the weight of strength. This was no longer just a file of sadness. It was a weapon, not the kind of weapon that strikes quickly. No, this was a patient weapon, a weapon that waits until the moment is right, then cuts deeper than any slap or scream. I hid the folder in the one place I knew she would never look, the bottom of the old trunk in the basement. That trunk had sat there for decades, full of dusty blankets and tools too rusty to use. She had never once opened it. Inside, beneath the clutter, I placed the binder of her secrets. Each time I added a new page, I lowered it into that trunk like a soldier sharpening his sword. And so I lived two lives. By day, I was the same husband she thought she had fooled. I sat at the table, ate her food, listened to her excuses. I nodded when she said she was tired. I kissed her cheek when she came home late. She thought my silence meant blindness. She thought my calm meant ignorance. She did not see that I had become a collector. She did not see that my quiet was stronger than her noise. By night, I was the man who built the file that would destroy her. Piece by piece, page by page, I gathered everything. Receipts, statements, screenshots, recordings, contracts, witness notes. Each one was another nail in the coffin of her lies, and I carried it all with patience, waiting for the day I would place it on a desk in front of a judge, and the truth would roar louder than her denials. That was who I became. Not a broken old man, but a collector of paper. A man who turned betrayal into evidence, silence into power, and lies into pages that could never be erased. The day came when paper was no longer enough. A folder in the basement can hold the truth, but paper alone cannot punish. Paper needs a place where it can breathe, where it can be read, where lies can be crushed under the weight of facts. That place is not the kitchen table. That place is the courtroom. And so I decided the file I had built would not stay hidden forever. It would walk with me into the law. I did not know where to begin. I was an old man with tired hands, not a man of courts or judges. But I had one thing stronger than any title or degree. I had evidence. And evidence is the language of the law. So one morning, with my coat buttoned tight and the folder pressed against my chest, I walked into a lawyer's office. The lawyer was young, younger than my sons, with eyes sharp like glass. He looked at me as though I might be wasting his time. But when I placed the folder on his desk, his eyes changed. He opened the cover, flipped through the first dozen pages, and leaned back in his chair. "You've been building this a long time," he said. I nodded. I told him that patience had been my only weapon. He read the receipts. He listened to the recordings. He studied the bank transfers. He looked at me after an hour and said, "This is not only betrayal. This is fraud. This is perjury waiting to happen. This is corruption on paper." His words were not kind, but they were the truth I needed. We began to weave the legal thread. He explained how each piece of paper was not just a scrap of proof, but a weapon when placed in the right sequence. The bank statements would show hidden accounts. The receipts would show false alibis. The emails would show intent. The recordings would show her own words betraying her. He told me we would not need to shout, not need to beg. The evidence would speak in the language no judge could ignore. So I followed his advice. I signed documents giving him permission to pull more records. I gave him the dates I had tracked in my notebook. He filed subpoenas that forced banks to reveal the rest. He issued requests that made hotels confirm their logs. He prepared witness lists of people who had seen her with him. Every step of the law added another knot to the rope she had tied around her own neck. I remember sitting across from him in that office, watching him slide papers into order. He said, "We will take this to court, and we will not accuse with anger. We will accuse with facts. Anger can be ignored. Facts cannot." Those words stayed with me. For so long I had wanted to scream, to ask her why she had done this to me, why she had destroyed what we had built. But now I knew the answer did not matter. What mattered was the judgment of the law. The weeks passed, and the legal file grew thicker. My folder of betrayal became a binder of evidence stamped with legal seals. The pages I had once hidden in fear now had weight. They were no longer just proof to me. They were weapons sharpened by lawyers, ready to strike in front of the court. I began to sleep again at night, though my sleep was shallow. I dreamed not of her smile, but of the day I would see her face when the truth was laid bare in front of everyone. Sometimes I asked myself if I was doing the right thing. I was raised to believe that family problems stay inside the house, that shame should not be made public, that secrets, even ugly ones, should stay hidden to protect a name. But then I remembered the nights I sat alone while she was in hotels with him. I remembered the way she called me poor, the way she laughed at me while planning another life behind my back. Number. She had already broken the house. She had already dragged my name through dirt. I owed her nothing. One evening, as I walked home from the lawyer's office, I passed by the courthouse steps. They rose high, stone and heavy, like the weight of history itself. I stopped and stared at them. I imagined walking up those steps with my file, imagined standing in that room with her across from me, imagined the silence when the papers were read out loud. I could almost hear the whispers, see the faces of people who once thought she was pure, now watching as her lies unfolded. That picture gave me strength. The legal thread grew tighter. Witnesses were called for interviews. Bank clerks confirmed signatures. Hotel managers admitted false names. Even the rich man she cheated with began to appear in the documents, his own name tied to her by payments, receipts, photos. The lawyer told me, "Once this reaches the courtroom, it will not only destroy her reputation, it will shake his too." That thought did not fill me with joy, but it filled me with justice. She had chosen him over me. Now his name would collapse beside hers. And so I prepared myself. I knew the day would come soon. I did not rehearse speeches. I did not write words to say. I left that to the papers, to the law, to the silence that falls heavy when evidence is undeniable. My role was only to endure, to stand, to let the truth I had collected do what my voice could never do. That was the legal thread, patient, steady, cold, a line woven from paper and ink, strong enough to pull down the house of lies she had built. And I held that thread in my hands, ready to place it in the one place where betrayal could no longer hide. The court. When you know the truth, and when you have the proof, the hardest thing is to stay quiet. The body wants to shout. The heart wants to explode. But I forced myself to stay calm. Calm was my shield. Calm was my weapon. I learned to wear silence like a coat, heavy but protective. She continued her days as if nothing had changed. She moved around the house with her perfume trailing behind her phone always close to her hand, her excuses ready on her lips. She laughed when she thought I was not listening, little bursts of joy sent to someone else, and I stayed silent. I ate the food she placed in front of me. I nodded when she said she was leaving for work. I even smiled, though inside my chest was a storm. It was not weakness, it was waiting. I had a file strong enough to break her, a lawyer preparing every thread of the case. But timing mattered. If I exploded too soon, she would hide. If I shouted too early, she would cover her tracks. So I waited with the patience of a man who has already lost everything and has nothing more to fear. At night, when she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and counted the days. I heard the hum of her breathing, steady and calm, as though she lived without worry. She had no idea that her world was already collapsing. She had no idea that her darkest secret was already chained to paper and ready for the light. That gave me strength, to know that she thought she was safe when in truth she was already cornered. There were moments I almost broke. Once she walked into the kitchen with her hair styled and her lips painted red, wearing a dress I had never seen before. She said she was going to a meeting. I wanted to laugh in her face, to throw the photos on the table, to watch her scramble. But instead, I looked at her and said, "Be careful on the road." My voice was steady. My face was calm. She kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. That kiss felt like fire on my skin. But I stayed still. Every day of silence was a test. Friends came by and asked why I seemed quiet. Neighbors spoke of seeing her car in places it did not belong. I nodded and said little. They thought I was tired, growing old. They did not know I was holding back a storm. Even my lawyer said, "You must be patient. Court is not a quick blade. It is slow, deliberate. Let her feel safe. Let her think you know nothing. That way, when the day comes, the fall will be harder." His words became my prayer. Patience, silence, cold waiting. So I played my role. I was the old man with soft steps, the husband too blind to see, the fool she thought she controlled. But inside, I was iron. Every laugh she gave to him, every lie she gave to me, only made my resolve sharper. She believed she was winning. She believed her secret life was safe. She believed I was too weak, too poor, too small to fight back. But she forgot one thing. A storm does not need to shout before it arrives. It builds in silence. It gathers in clouds. It waits for the right moment. And when it breaks, it destroys everything in its path. That was me in those weeks. The storm, in silence. Calm on the outside, fire on the inside. I waited for the courtroom, the one place where my silence would finally end, and where her lies would be shattered by the truth she thought I would never find. The day finally came. The air felt heavy when I woke. My hands trembled as I buttoned my old coat, but not from fear. It was the weight of years, the weight of betrayal, the weight of knowing that the storm I had carried in silence was about to break. I picked up the folder, thick, heavy, overflowing with paper that held her lies. For months, it had lived hidden in my basement. Today, it would live on the desk of a judge. The courthouse was tall, stone and gray, its steps worn by years of footsteps. As I climbed those steps, I thought of all the times I had walked home from work with aching legs, carrying groceries in torn bags, only to hand them to her with a smile. Those memories pressed down on me, but I kept walking. Each step felt like a piece of the past falling away. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but tense. The air smelled of wood polish and old paper. People shuffled in the benches, waiting. Some came out of curiosity, some because they had heard whispers, and some because they simply wanted to see a story unfold. I sat at the table beside my lawyer, the folder resting in front of me like a silent companion. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. Then she walked in. My wife, or the woman who had once worn that title, entered with her head high. She wore her best dress, her hair perfect, her lips painted. She looked confident, almost smug, as though this was nothing but a minor obstacle. And beside her, in the back of the room, sat the rich man. His suit was expensive, his watch gleamed, but his eyes were restless. He did not smile. He only glanced around, as though afraid the walls themselves might expose him. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The silence that followed was thick, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat feel like thunder. The proceedings began, and my lawyer rose. He spoke not with anger, not with drama, but with calm precision. He laid the file on the desk and began to open it, page by page, like peeling away the layers of her mask. First came the receipts. The dinners at restaurants I could never afford. The hotel bills under false names. The jewelry purchases timed perfectly with her lies about working late. Each one was handed to the judge, each one marked, each one undeniable. Her smile faltered. She shifted in her seat. Then came the bank statements. Transfers to hidden accounts, payments that matched the dates of her meetings. My lawyer pointed to her signature, her handwriting on forms she thought I would never see. She stared at the pages, her face pale now, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Then came the emails and messages. The courtroom fell into a hush as the words were read aloud. Her laughter, her promises, her plans with him, all exposed in black and white. The judge's eyebrows raised. The audience whispered. She bowed her head, unable to meet their eyes. And finally, the recordings. Her voice filled the room, soft but sharp, saying things she never thought anyone else would hear. Promises of loyalty to him, lies spoken about me, her giggles as she mocked me behind my back. The sound cut through the air like a blade. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on the desk, but I could feel the weight of everyone else's eyes on her. By the time the last piece of evidence was presented, the room was silent. Even the rich man shifted uncomfortably, sweat glistening on his forehead. His name had appeared in documents, in payments, in her words. He was no longer untouchable. He was tied to her, dragged down by her secrets. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy. He said the evidence was clear, undeniable, and devastating. He said betrayal had been proven, fraud had been uncovered, and lies had been exposed. His words were not angry, but they carried the weight of finality. I sat still, my hands folded, my heart steady. I did not cheer. I did not smile. I did not need to. The truth had spoken louder than anything I could say. I glanced once at her. Her face was ashen, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. For years, she had mocked me, lied to me, used me. Now the world saw her for what she truly was. That was the day in court. Not a fight of fists, not a storm of screams, but a slow, steady cutting of lies with the sharp edge of truth. The papers I had collected in silence became the voice I never raised. The storm I had carried inside me finally broke, not with thunder, but with evidence. The courtroom ended, but the echo did not. The walls may have gone silent when the judge left, but outside those doors, the whispers began, and whispers travel faster than fire. What had been private shame became public knowledge. It spread through the town like smoke curling under doors, reaching every ear, filling every street. My wife, who once carried herself like a queen, was now the subject of every conversation, and not one word spoken was kind. It began with the newspapers. Reporters sat in the back rows of the courtroom, scribbling notes as the evidence was read aloud. They had come expecting a simple trial, perhaps a divorce with bitterness, maybe some money disputes. But what they heard was betrayal wrapped in fraud, secrets tied to corruption, lies stacked as high as the courthouse itself. They wrote it all down, and by the next morning, her name was printed in headlines, not as a victim, not as a respected woman, but as a liar, as a cheater, as a fraud. Her photo, once polished and confident, now stared back from the front page beside words that burned, "Local woman exposed in court scandal." Her colleagues at work were the next to turn. For years, she had walked into offices with her head high, wearing dresses that sparkled, flashing jewelry that whispered wealth. They had admired her, envied her, praised her. Now those same people kept their distance. Her phone calls went unanswered. Invitations vanished. The same mouths that once smiled at her now muttered when she passed. She had built her pride on their admiration, but admiration is a fragile crown. When it falls, it shatters. The rich man did not escape either. His name had been tied to hers in documents, in transfers, in whispers too loud to ignore. His empire, built on deals and appearances, began to crack. Investors backed away. Clients questioned his integrity. Colleagues who had once laughed at his jokes now avoided his gaze. He had thought himself untouchable. He had thought money would protect him. But money cannot erase paper stamped by law. His wealth could buy silence once, but it could not silence a courtroom. And together, their unraveling became entertainment for others. Neighbors spoke of it over fences, shaking their heads, some with pity, many with satisfaction. Strangers in cafes read about it and whispered across tables, glancing at her if she dared to walk by. Even her friends, those who once toasted her at parties, began to disappear. One by one, they slipped away, unwilling to be dragged into her shadow. For me, watching from a distance, it was strange. There was no joy in it, not the kind people expect. I did not clap my hands or laugh at her downfall. Number. It was quieter than that. It was like watching a storm wash away a house that had been rotting for years. Sad, inevitable, but also just. What she had built was never real. Now the world simply saw it for what it was. The hardest part for her was the silence. She tried to explain, to excuse, to call me bitter, to call me vindictive. But no one listened. The papers, the receipts, the recordings, they were louder than her excuses. Her words, once sharp and clever, now sounded hollow. And when hollow words meet heavy evidence, they vanish. I heard that she cried in public once, outside the office she no longer worked at. People passed by, some looking, some ignoring, but no one stopping to comfort her. The woman who once stood tall with confidence now sat on a curb with tears on her cheeks. I was not there. I did not need to be. Her pain was no longer my concern. Her ruin belonged to her choices. The rich man tried to distance himself, tried to deny the depth of their connection. But the papers had tied him too closely. His name was already inked beside hers. His reputation fell alongside hers. They were bound together, not in love, but in shame. And shame is a rope that chokes both ends. The unraveling did not happen in a single day. It stretched out like a long thread, pulling more and more of her world apart. Each week, another friend gone. Each month, another piece of respect stripped away. By the end of the year, she was a shadow of herself. The woman who once mocked me, who once called me poor, who once thought she had climbed higher than me, now stood lower than I had ever been. And me? I stayed silent. I did not answer her calls. I did not reply to her letters. I watched from a distance, not as a man gloating, but as a man finished. I had done my part. The court had spoken. The papers had spread. The world had judged. She was ruined not by my hands, but by her own actions finally revealed. That was the public unraveling. Slow, steady, merciless. Not by fire, not by fists, but by whispers, headlines, and silence. She lost everything that mattered to her. Her pride, her image, her respect. And in that loss, she finally learned the cost of betrayal. When the court ended, when the papers printed, when the whispers filled the streets, I knew my part was finished. I had no more battles to fight, no more words to speak, no more evidence to show. I had given the truth to the world, and the world had used it to break her false crown. Now, it was time for me to vanish, to walk away from the stage where betrayal had been exposed, and to find a silence where my name could not be touched. Leaving is not always dramatic. It does not always mean slamming doors or shouting last words. Sometimes leaving is quiet. It is the soft sound of a suitcase being zipped in the dark. It is the careful folding of old clothes that still carry the smell of years. It is the passport slipped into the inner pocket of a jacket. It is the sound of keys left behind on a table that once belonged to two, but now belongs to none. That night, my vanish began with silence. I packed little. A man who has been betrayed does not need much. A few shirts, one coat, some cash, the documents that still carried my name. I left behind the house, the furniture, the photographs. They had already been stained by lies. I wanted no reminders of her perfume, no shadows of her laughter, no ghosts of her betrayal. My suitcase was light because my heart was heavy, and I did not want to carry both. I walked through the town without saying goodbye. Neighbors might have asked questions, friends might have offered pity, but I did not want either. Goodbyes are for those who plan to return. I had no such plan. My vanish was final. My steps were steady, though every corner held memories. The bakery where she once smiled, the park bench where we once sat in silence after long days, the street where we once walked holding hands. Each place now felt like a grave of something dead. I did not stop to mourn. I only walked. At the station, I bought a ticket with cash. No cards, no names, no trail. Just a slip of paper that promised distance. The train pulled in with a roar, and I stepped aboard without looking back. The town shrank behind me, its lights dimming into dots on the horizon. With each mile, the weight on my chest grew lighter. The betrayal stayed behind. The shame stayed behind. The court, the whispers, the lies, all stayed behind. Ahead was only the unknown, and for the first time in years, the unknown felt safe. From the train to the airport, the journey continued. Airports are strange places. They belong to no one and to everyone. People rushing, people waiting, people leaving, people returning. I was just another face in the crowd, just another man with a bag and a boarding pass. No one knew me. No one whispered about me. No one pointed or judged. It was freedom in its simplest form. To be invisible. I chose a country far away, one where my language was foreign and my history unknown. Distance is the best shield against those who once hurt you. I had no desire to watch her struggle, no hunger to see her fall further. That was her story now, not mine. My vanish was not about her ruin, it was about my peace. She had destroyed the life we shared, but she would not destroy the life I would now build. On the plane, as the engines roared and the ground fell away, I felt something break loose inside me. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was release. Betrayal is a chain, heavy and sharp. To stay near the one who betrayed you is to stay chained. But to vanish, to truly vanish, is to break the chain forever. As clouds swallowed the view below, I knew I would never see that town again. I knew I would never hear her voice again, and I knew that was my justice. In the new country, I found a small place to live. A room with plain walls, a window that looked out at streets where no one knew my name. Each morning I woke, and no one called me worthless. No one mocked me, no one betrayed me. Silence filled the spaces where pain once lived. I cooked my own meals, walked my own streets, spoke little, but listened much. The world was wide, and I was free inside it. Meanwhile, I heard through distant whispers that she struggled. Her rich man's empire cracked, her friends scattered, her name stained beyond repair. But those were only echoes. I did not chase them. I did not need to see them. Her ruin was not my home anymore. My home was peace, and peace does not need proof. The vanish was not a punishment. It was a rebirth. A man betrayed, a man humiliated, a man broken. He walked away. And in walking away, he became whole again. She might spend the rest of her life explaining her shame, but I would spend the rest of mine in quiet freedom. That is what the vanish means. Not to hide, not to run, but to step into a life where betrayal has no voice. And so, I vanished. No calls, no letters, no trace. Just a man with a past burned away and a future unclaimed. She was left with her lies, her secrets, her ruin. I was left with silence, and silence, at last, felt like victory. I sit now in a place far from where it all began. The air is different here. The streets are filled with faces that have never spoken my name. There are no whispers of betrayal, No eyes that look at me with pity, no voices that laugh at my expense. For the first time in my long life, I live quietly. I rise in the morning with no weight pressing down on my chest. I eat simply, walk slowly, and breathe air that belongs to no one but me. That is the reward of leaving behind everything that once burned me. She is still out there somewhere, carrying the burden of what she did. She will wake up each day to the memory of that courtroom, to the faces that turned away from her, to the shame she tried to bury but cannot escape. That is her life now. I do not need to watch it. I do not need to measure her suffering. Her downfall belongs to her. My peace belongs to me. We are separate now, and that separation is the truest form of justice. I do not think of her as my wife anymore. That title died the day I saw her betray me with another man. What she destroyed was not only a marriage, but also the trust of decades, the hope of companionship, the dream of loyalty. But in destroying those things, she gave me something she never intended. Freedom. Freedom to walk away. Freedom to vanish. Freedom to build a final chapter where her shadow cannot reach. When people hear my story, they ask why I did not stay to watch her fall, why I did not fight for revenge with my own hands. But revenge does not always shout. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a man in his old age, walking through an airport with nothing but a suitcase and the truth. Sometimes it is disappearing so completely that the betrayer is left with only silence. And so, this is my last thought. She cheated, she lied, she laughed. I exposed her darkest secret for the world to see, and then I left. She is trapped in the ruins she made. I live free, in silence. That silence is my victory.